While searching the restaurant for the client I was supposed to meet, I observed my former spouse, Susan, who was of average build but exhibited indications of excess weight. The man appeared to have once been in good physical condition, but the effects of excess over time had visibly altered his physique. Susan was seated next to him, displaying a radiant demeanor. The man exuded affluence, and upon entering the foyer, my memories of him flooded back, despite the 3-year interval since our divorce. The intensity of these feelings was as acute as if they had occurred only recently. I ultimately found myself in this situation, observing from a distance rather than being by her side. Nevertheless, as events unfolded, her desires were fulfilled. My issues began when I traveled to Albany for a client appointment, choosing to stay overnight to avoid a lengthy return journey. However, just an hour into the drive, the client contacted me to report a broken fender, though he was unharmed. He apologized for the late cancellation and conveyed his regret. I assured him that it was no inconvenience and suggested we reschedule. Nonetheless, I felt unprepared for the additional 2 hours of travel ahead. I promised to do my best. I intend to return home for a surprise romantic dinner with my lovely wife. 90 minutes later, I turned onto my street. The first thing I noticed was the sight of 3 unusual cars parked in the driveway did not initially elicit any particular response, given that my wife frequently invited her friends over while I was away. I therefore parked on the street and proceeded to enter the house, assuming that everything was in order. However, the discovery of 4 sets of clothes strewn across the living room floor immediately indicated that something was amiss. As I stood there, a visceral reaction began to take hold. I was struck by a sudden and profound realization: my wife's emotional cry was not a request for assistance. Instead, it was a common appeal for more passionate lovemaking. My heart fell as I came to terms with the reality that my wife was engaging in a carnal experience with someone else, despite my reservations. I realized that I needed to confront the reality that awaited me upstairs. When I reached the top of the stairs, I heard my wife's primal scream while peeping around the bedroom door frame. I noticed 3 males, 2 of whom I was unfamiliar with. The third was undoubtedly Jeff Davis, my wife's superior at work. I was taken aback to observe my wife engaging in sexual intercourse with him. My disapproval of Jeff intensified as he showered her with compliments and acknowledged her contributions to his business. It was distressing to realize that Jeff was exploiting my wife for professional gain. All 3 men treated her as a mere object of pleasure, using disparaging language and asserting their authority over her. Witnessing her behavior was a stark contrast to the respectable woman I had known throughout our 10-year marriage. During the course of my wife's 10-year marriage to Jeff, I found myself in agreement with his pejorative moniker for her. I proceeded to descend the stairs unnoticed, seeking refuge in my office and retrieving my digital video camera. I discovered that it still had some battery life, with an old holiday tape inside with recording space. I set up the camera at my wife's bedroom door with the intention of documenting her behavior. For legal reasons, rather than creating an unlawful spectacle, I recorded footage of my wife's face and the other people involved. However, I could only stand for approximately 5 or 10 minutes before my emotions took over. While such a scene may be appealing to some, it left me feeling unhappy and betrayed, and I felt completely deflated. I went downstairs to collect my thoughts in my office. I retrieved my weapon from the safe, removing it as a precaution despite my lack of inclination toward violence. I was compelled to assert myself if things worsened. I entered the living room and retrieved the car keys and wallets from the abandoned pants scattered across the floor while deflating the tires of all vehicles parked outside, including Sue's. Upon returning the automobile indoors, I experienced a surge of confidence as I formulated a strategy that I was convinced would succeed. I had discovered Sue's mobile phone on the bedside table during my recording. I prepared my camera, positioned myself discreetly behind the steps, and dialed her telephone. After several unsuccessful attempts, she eventually detected silence, indicating that she had detected my presence. The home indicated that she had warned the others to be silent. Sue inquired, "Hello Bobby, how is Albany?" The men in the room could be heard chuckling lightly. "You appear winded. Are you okay?" I feigned concern in my voice. "Yes, I had to hurry upstairs for my phone call," she said quickly, composing herself. "My customer canceled, so I'll be home soon. Are you interested?" During the course of the evening meal, I inquired gently, although I was experiencing a greater degree of distress than usual, whether she was intending to return home. She responded with enthusiasm, indicating that she would be leaving shortly. I was left with the impression that I should smile. Four individuals, who were completely undressed, began descending the stairs into the living room. The men proceeded with haste. Dressed, Sue hastily tidied herself as they all hastened out. Sue donned shoes and a jacket and gazed outside, hoping they would depart before she did. Had she not been so enthusiastic, she might have noticed my automobile parked on the street. Sue stepped onto the porch to listen after the men began shouting at her simultaneously. At that moment, I forcefully closed the front door. Furthermore, I secured the door behind her. My wife observed my demeanor and attempted to communicate via the side window with a plaintive tone. She indicated that the time for discussion had passed. The other men returned to my porch and banged on the front door, signaling that they wanted their goods. I then called emergency services to report an attempted break-in. The dispatcher informed me that a neighbor had already called and provided my name and address. I then awaited the arrival of police assistance, which occurred a mere 2 minutes later. Once the officers had questioned my wife, I approached them and informed them that my wife had been mistreated by the males present and demanded their arrest. The men reacted immediately, stating that they had been invited and that my wife had agreed. They denied any allegations of mistreatment. Everyone, including myself, then turned to Sue and waited for her reaction. She avoided eye contact and stated, in a subdued and shame-filled voice, she admitted to having invited the men into the house and engaged in sexual activity with them. She denied any allegations of mistreatment. She acted on her own volition. The men appeared relieved that they would not face prosecution for abuse. Soon after, 2 more police cars arrived, and they took everyone's identities for their report. The senior officer then addressed me, implying that because my wife had brought these men, all of whom were over the age of 18, there was little legal recourse. He suggested counseling or similar aid, delivering the comment. With a dismissive sneer at my wife, I informed the police that she would not be permitted back into the residence that evening and requested that they call a taxi. One of the men summoned a taxi after noticing their flat tires and attempted to accuse me of stealing their goods. However, I refuted their claims to the police. I then proceeded to walk back to the porch, where Sue remained with them until the taxi arrived. I stood on the porch, my eyes filled with rage. Despite my rage, my wife approached me with courage, unaware of my fury and the pistol in my hand. If she had possessed the knowledge of Bobby, she could have escaped. I am truly sorry that she began to speak, but I quickly interrupted her. I crushed my heart, and I will never forgive her. Jeff called her a strumpet, and I believe it is an appropriate description. I will now refer to her as such and will not use her true name again. If she ever needs to speak with me, she can do so via Tad. With those final remarks, I retreated into the home and locked the door. She returned to the group in tears, and Jeff moved to soothe her. She refused his embrace, which caused her distress. The initial sensation of comfort was soon replaced by a sense of disquiet upon returning to my bedroom. The aroma of sexual intercourse lingered in the air, evoking a strong emotional response. I was overcome with a sense of rage and proceeded to ransack the room, pulling the mattress from its frame and hurling it onto the front lawn. I then retrieved my tools from the garage and proceeded to disassemble the bed, tossing the pieces outside along with the mattress. I returned to Sue's bedroom and retrieved her cell phone from the floor. I began scrolling through her contacts and messages, only to discover a series of unsavory emails, images, and videos. Images of unknown males engaging in sexual acts with her were revealed upon examination of the photographs. It was evident that she was familiar with them. I reflected on my previous attentiveness to her, recognizing that those days were long behind. I proceeded to relocate all of the boxes from our bedroom downstairs and placed them in separate stacks on the front lawn, while removing her items from the guest room. In the process of moving each dresser drawer outdoors, as I had done with the bedroom belongings, I encountered unexpected resistance with the final bottom drawer. I forcibly removed it and discovered. After hearing a telltale crack and exerting some force, the drawer finally opened, revealing the source of the obstruction, 7 or 8 DVDs buried beneath. I had inadvertently shattered one of the plastic casings, but thankfully the drive stayed intact. My heart sank again as I inspected the discs. I did not believe I could feel any worse. Descending the stairs, I inspected the titles on the CDs, which only added to my misery. Upon arriving in the living room, I set everything on shelves for closer scrutiny. The first disc showed Sue. Additionally, her close friend Sarah hosted events for Avon, which were typically held on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It appeared that Sue and Sarah were engaging in intimate actions with numerous individuals at their residence. As I observed the footage for several hours, I became emotionally distressed and ceased viewing when I reached the final 2 discs. The initial image depicted Sue and her tennis instructor, whom she had paid for services. The instructor attended lessons every Saturday and returned exhausted for closeness later in the evening. As the footage progressed, it became evident that the second disc depicted Sue engaging in intimate interactions at work, particularly in the boardroom with Jeff, her employer, and Jeff's superior, Bill Evans. Bill Evans exercised considerable influence in the community, frequently featuring in newspaper articles for his charitable activities, which I subsequently observed to encompass my wife's personal issues. I retrieved a voluminous envelope and meticulously placed a cell phone, CDs, and a cassette tape, previously recorded by me, inside. My objective was to transfer the entire envelope to my lawyer and confidant, Ted, with whom I had been friends for an extended period. He was one of the only 2 individuals in whom I had fully entrusted my confidence. At that juncture, nothing else held significance. Upon observing Sue's computer on the desk, I initiated its operation and proceeded to transfer every file, email, photograph, and video to 2 external disks. The process concluded approximately an hour later. Thereafter, I took a seat to peruse my wife's digital archives. Among the videos, I observed those bearing resemblance to those I had previously encountered on the CDs. Additionally, I encountered images of an explicit nature, commonly associated with adult websites. I proceeded to delve more deeply into the matter. Despite her efforts to hide them under bogus file names, I discovered a plethora of emails covering almost 6 months' worth of correspondence. These emails revealed interactions between her and Jeff, as well as numerous other individuals. Additionally, I found emails between her and Sarah, which I had rejected only last week. One of these emails nearly devastated me. I considered using my weapon, but determined she wasn't worth it. I had to stay strong. Sue's email to Sarah was the only one that had such a strong impact on me. Sarah wondered why she hadn't left me to be alone again, and she asked Sue to describe her ideal future husband. Here is her response. I am no longer interested in him. Bobby is loyal, but he is also somewhat naive. I am concerned that he may discover my secret lifestyle. He is not completely unaware of it, but his love for me blinds him. He has recently gained weight, and his expanding belly is unappealing compared to other males. He falls short of my expectations. I also dislike beards and mustaches, which make him appear ugly. I used to adore him, but the thrill of recent years has made it impossible for me to let go. His lawyer and closest friend are. Should he become involved, complications may ensue. Jeff and Bill's discussion at work regarding promotions and benefits hints at sexual undertones. I find this amusing. Additionally, I desire a house and a car. Should I play my cards right, I may also be able to secure monthly alimony. Furthermore, I am eagerly anticipating our Tuesday gathering, once I recuperate from my tennis injury. Tony is noteworthy. Please ensure that I received the video from last Thursday. It was my inaugural experience with so many men at once. My ideal man should be prosperous, loyal, and cooperative. He must cater to my every whim while simultaneously requesting that I provide him with financial resources. I am indifferent to sexual activity as long as monetary gain is involved. I am capable of fulfilling my needs elsewhere. At times, it seems too simple. Bobby is now home. I must see you on Tuesday. Call me Sue. I have read this letter multiple times. It is filled with disgust, and the past few years have caused significant emotional distress. Did she truly feel this way about me? Was my love so blind that she engaged in infidelity for over 2 years after we separated? I subsequently experienced a profound emotional crisis. I retired for the night and was soon asleep on the sofa. The following morning, I was troubled by restless sleep and decided to take the day off work. I went out to Tedworth, where I had a personal friend and lawyer, Mary Ted. The secretary answered the phone. I had known her nearly as long as Ted. I immediately demanded a meeting with him, but she informed me that he would be in court all day. Mary told Ted that I needed to meet him in his office in an hour. If he starts pestering you with nonsense, mention Tammy Brown's name. That will get his attention. See you in an hour. I terminated the call when my phone rang. I began to dress, reluctant to speak with Sue. I examined the caller ID. It was an unfamiliar number, so I answered, hoping it was Ted returning my call. Hello, Mr. Thomas. I am Bill Evans from Susan's office. If feasible, I would like to address the events of last night at your residence. Could we meet today in my office to clarify the situation for everyone involved? I am uncertain if he was aware of the video footage of him and my wife at his office. I sensed that he was concerned about Jeff Davis's clientele were of significant importance to him, and he was likely reluctant to lose them. Additionally, he was evidently concerned about the potential negative publicity that could affect his company and himself. Mr. Evans, I have an important meeting this morning, but I will contact you at this number before noon to set up something for today. I reassured him gently, presenting it as if he were reasoning with me. He was in for a surprise as I stepped outside and observed what appeared to be a peculiar yard sale. The garments remained strewn about on the splintered bed. An elderly neighbor waved with a confused smile. I was aware that I would be the subject of conversation in the neighborhood, as the news had reported. It was a phenomenon that had occurred in the city center. I obtained nourishment before proceeding directly to Ted's office. Mary prepared a cup of coffee for me, with a generous amount of milk and no sugar. We have had a lengthy history together. I was astonished to hear Bobby say that he was unsure of the details of our conversation, but that I should clear Ted's schedule for the day. A month off, she remarked. If you wish to ascertain the identity of Tammy Brown, you might inquire with Ted. However, I am uncertain of his whereabouts. He had previously informed me that he would be present immediately, but he has since rescheduled his court hearing. I was informed of his arrival just then. He entered the office, and I was immediately aware of his displeasure. I was informed that I was in serious trouble for mentioning his name. I was instructed to enter the office and discuss the matter with him. Mary, do not put me through to anyone at this time. I grabbed my coffee and followed him into the office. I closed the door to ensure privacy. I then proceeded to describe the events of the previous evening and the information I had acquired regarding Sue's new lifestyle. I then handed him an envelope containing the proof I had obtained. He eventually spoke, listening attentively to my narrative without interruption. I could see the legal gears working in his head as he absorbed the events of the previous night. I also informed him of Bill Evans's request for a meeting that day. Well, Bobby, I began, as they say, let us prioritize. I continued, I have known you for a long time, and I realize how. He inquired whether there was any possibility of reconciling with Sue. Ted informed him that his wife and he had discovered the incriminating tapes and emails. He demanded that she leave him immediately. He stated that he desired a divorce but also wanted to cause significant damage. He said that he would not take this betrayal calmly. He confessed. The first step, he said, would be to sue Tony and the tennis club. Sarah was off the table because she was only a friend. Sue's workplace, however, was a different scenario. Second, he said, they would sue the two clients and their businesses. At the residence, we will also target Jeff Davis, Bill Evans, and their associates. He cautioned that circumstances could deteriorate before they improved. Ted warned me, but I am prepared to engage in physical confrontation if necessary. I will hold these individuals accountable for their actions through Sue. I asserted in an assertive tone. Bobby, reiterate what Bill Evans requested, and we will proceed accordingly. He informed me that we had considered numerous options, and I preferred the final one, a direct attack on Sue's workplace. Ted posited that he had leverage in this situation, citing video footage of Davis, Evans, and Sue in their boardroom. He emphasized that they affected Sue's position because they were her superiors. This could potentially result in substantial legal ramifications. Ted also suggested that once Bill Evans saw the evidence we had, his posture might change. This could potentially lead to a settlement offer. However, if the offer is less than $2 million, it is unlikely to be accepted. I stated firmly that I would tell you what. Ted, make it $2 million. $5 million. I had previously observed the legal expenses associated with this matter. I was jesting, however. I will be available at 7 p.m. tonight. Katie will prepare a meal for us. You could benefit from a brief respite from your current circumstances. I immediately scheduled an appointment with Bill Evans for 2 p.m. I will be monitoring this situation. Mary entered the office. Ted, they have contacted you via the online portal. Mary, I advised you not to engage with them. Ted, this is Susan. She wishes to speak with you. Mary persisted. Ted, it is going to be a long day, and it is only just beginning. Is she aware that Bobby is here? Ted, tell her I will speak with her shortly. Mary quickly exited. I surmise that she has already discovered that her cellular telephone, computer, and all of her DVDs are missing. I postulate that she was displeased when I relocated her belongings, including our bed, to the front lawn. I informed him that he had a particularly hectic evening. I requested that he refrain from interjecting as her legal counsel and suggested that we continue the conversation. I then initiated a connection to the call. I began to overhear a one-sided conversation, but I could almost understand what she was saying to Ted without hearing her words. The conversation was one-sided, yet I could discern the essence of her discourse with Ted, despite the absence of audible words. Hello, Susan, she said. This is Ted. I have already consulted with him. Bobby is a commendable individual, a reliable associate. I presumed you, of all people, would have his back, rather than betray him. There are no justifications, Sue. I am not in the mood to engage in such discourse. Nevertheless, I will represent him. He presents compelling arguments. It is evident that this situation will not be straightforward. I will speak with him, but it is clear that you have caused significant harm to an individual who has consistently demonstrated loyalty and affection. It is unlikely that he will prioritize your perspective. My recommendation is to seek legal counsel from a qualified professional. Bill Evans has scheduled an appointment for 2 o'clock. The time is 10 a.m. However, I advise against attending. If you attempt to eavesdrop outside the office door, I will inform Bobby to leave, which will likely result in a more hostile response. It would be preferable to wait and remain calm today. I understand he left your belongings on the lawn, but just as you can welcome visitors into your bedroom, he can take your belongings from the house. I am surprised he did not use violence last night. Yes, he was armed for self-defense, but it is important to remember that he was motivated by a fear that you were in danger of being assaulted. This is evident from the police report. While it is not possible to be certain, if I were in your position, I would expect to find him in jail. His behavior was likely driven by anger, given the circumstances surrounding your computer, cell phone, and any other lost items. In order to communicate effectively with the other co-owners, it is essential to understand the situation. It is possible that the owner placed the items on the lawn with your clothing and that someone took them. I handled all of the escrow paperwork for the house, so I am aware of your equal rights regarding it. You both have the freedom to exercise these rights in your own way. Ted said that he would notify him immediately and encouraged Sue severely to stay where she was and let Bobby stay in the house until things were sorted, as it was not safe for her to be there with him at the time. He then implored Sue not to push it, admitting his desire to punch her. He informed her that she should remain with Sarah and promised to maintain communication, requesting that her lawyer contact him once they had hired one. Ted was unmoved by her tears, as he was not only Bobby's lawyer but also his friend. He stated that her tears would not influence him and that he was prepared to be unyielding when necessary. He expressed regret that she would witness a side of him that only his opponents see and warned her that she would not find it appealing. Ted concluded by instructing Sue to it is advisable to maintain a certain distance from Bobby and to remain in the office for the time being, given his apparent lack of interest in interacting with her. Ted then looked up at me and inquired as to whether I had managed to catch most of the conversation. He replied in a melancholy tone, stating that he had indeed managed to do so. He then expressed his desire to approach her in person and to explain his actual feelings. However, he also acknowledged that he did not believe he could face the trauma of seeing her again, at least not yet. He then proceeded to make a few requests of Bobby. His demeanor shifted abruptly to one of cheerfulness and optimism. He instructed me to retrieve the recordings from the envelope from the previous night, specifically the videotapes featuring Tony at the tennis club and Sue with Mr. Davis and Mr. Evans at her office. After handing him the cassettes, he advised me to extend an invitation to Mary for lunch. I expressed my confusion, and he promptly replied that it would be preferable for him to review the recordings himself to avoid any additional stress before our scheduled appointment at 2 p.m. Furthermore, I do not believe that viewing this information will be beneficial to you at this time. I do not want you to experience distress before our meeting with Bill Evans. I was grateful for his counsel and expressed my gratitude before disclosing the positive news to Mary. She joked that if Ted had paid for the meal, I should take her to a more upscale restaurant. We both laughed and departed the premises. Mary was an excellent dining companion, and for the next hour, she helped me to temporarily forget my problems. When we returned, upon entering the office, we were greeted by Ted, who was visibly excited. He was cheering and even doing a brief victory dance at his desk. These recordings have the potential to be transformative, Bobby. I must admit that I am still processing this information. I believe that Ted was finally able to comprehend the significance of these films. I understand that Sue's actions have caused you a great deal of pain. I was simply excited about what I discovered. He apologized sincerely. Bobby, I need your attention. Come over. I require your attention on a matter of some importance. Ted beckoned, and I complied by positioning myself behind him to observe the screen. Have you viewed the complete video Tony filmed at the tennis club with Sue? He inquired. I was only able to skim through some of it last night. It was challenging to endure without feeling the urge to lash out or, worse, do something even more regrettable. I admit that, honestly, so prepare yourselves. Toward the end, shortly after Tony and Sue conclude, they draw a small crowd into the men's changing area. This is the tennis club's changing room. I am obliged to admit that she permitted the other men who were observing the proceedings to join in after Tony. I am not disclosing this information to cause offense, but to provide some insight into this individual. Ted explained, pointing to the screen on his desk. The person he was referring to was an older man, dressed in a towel, with long gray hair and a walrus-like mustache. He inquired as to whether I recognized him. I initiated playback of the video footage and observed the individual in question discarding his towel, revealing a substantial physical endowment that any man might be proud of. The issue at hand was that he proceeded to approach my wife and persuade her to engage in sexual intercourse. In the immediate aftermath, she was encircled by 5 additional men, all visibly eager for their turn. I informed Ted that I was uncertain about the identity of this person, but I presumed he was already aware. This is a matter that requires our attention at the 16th Street Tennis Club, he replied. His enthusiasm was evident as he described his method. I smiled when I heard his plan. Ted was not only my friend but also an excellent lawyer. I felt relieved to have him on my side. We left his office for downtown equipped with a portable DVD player, printed photographs, and legal envelopes. When we arrived at Sue's building, we went to Bill Evans's office, which was on the top floor. Sue's office was 1 floor below. After waiting in the reception area, we were led into Mr. Evans's office, which was luxuriously equipped. As I entered, I noticed someone in the corridor watching me. I looked in that direction and caught a glimpse of the woman before she disappeared around the corner. I thought to myself, I am relieved that I will not need to confront her today. We proceeded to enter Bill's office, which was decorated with rich furnishings, decorations, awards, and images of him with various prominent personalities. I was prompted to inquire whether he had ever brought Sue to that location at that juncture. My disapproval of Mr. Evans had intensified. I introduced Ted and initiated the discussion. Good morning, Mr. Evans. This is my colleague Ted Worth, who will be accompanying us for the meeting you scheduled today. I informed Bill as we exchanged handshakes, Mr. Thomas, I assumed this was a private meeting between you and me. Mr. Evans inquired, so I decided to invite Ted along. He could hear whatever I had to say. Furthermore, I informed him that I had stated, in a clear and unambiguous manner, that I did not intend to permit any further discussion. Mr. Evans then acknowledged Ted's presence and proceeded to focus his remarks exclusively on me, ignoring Ted. This made Ted smile. I was aware of what was about to occur, but I allowed Mr. Evans to speak first, before I interrupted him. Mr. Evans, I am aware that you are expecting me to confirm that there are no difficulties. However, I believe it would be advantageous to have Jeff Davis present at this meeting as well. I am not. It is, at least, a realistic assumption that Evans will be troubled by this turn of events. I informed him after a brief interval that he should proceed to my office immediately. I instructed Julie to inform Jeff that I required his presence in my office without delay. Jeff will arrive shortly. In the meantime, I would like to express my sincerest regret for the disruption that Jeff and Sue have caused in your life. I am aware that last night must have been a terrible ordeal. However, if we, by working together, we may be able to identify a solution that benefits all parties involved. Bill expressed optimism. What exactly do you mean? I inquired while awaiting Jeff's arrival. I care about your wife, Sue, Bill began, but was interrupted by Jeff's arrival. He paused for a moment as if he were about to turn and leave, but Bill urged him to take a seat. Jeff reluctantly complied, avoiding eye contact with me and Bob. I wanted to express my deep affection, I stated. For Sue, he treated her almost like a daughter. When Ted interjected, he began speaking. Are you saying that you have a penchant for incest? He inquired, catching him off guard. I chuckled to myself, realizing the meaning behind Ted's words. What are your suggestions? Do I have a preference for incest? What exactly does that mean? He responded with outrage. Please allow me to illustrate, he continued. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Ted then proceeded to place the DVD on the table. The player on Bill's desk displayed a series of screenshots from the video that was to be viewed. The images had been provided to Jeff, not Bill. Upon viewing them, Jeff's eyes widened, and he proceeded to hand them over to Bill. The photographs depicted Bill and Jeff engaged in sexual activity with my wife, leaving no doubt as to their identities or the nature of their activities. I sensed that Bill recognized his own boardroom table, where he and Sue had been working. Jeff, are you truly claiming that you were so naive as to film this and distribute copies? Bill inquired, almost dumbfounded. Jeff was clearly unable to respond and was absolutely confused. Here's how it will go to clarify, Mr. Evans began. I am both Bobby's attorney and friend, so let me explain what we expect and how we expect you to handle it. Mr. Davis's absence from the proceedings did not preclude his involvement in the situation, as evidenced by his representative's statement to Bill, accompanied by a sly wink. The latter's declaration to Bill, accompanied by a gesture towards the perplexed Jeff, was followed by a demand for a monetary offer that would meet the parties' expectations. The initial proposal was to be considered, and a response was to be provided within 5 business days. The possibility of legal action within 2 months, or even sooner, was also indicated. Before they could respond, Tad began to rotate the film screen for Bill's viewing. It depicted both males engaging in sexual activities with my wife on multiple occasions within their boardroom. Jeff was not required to watch, as he was involved in the video recording. Bill, however, observed the scene with a gaping mouth, and it was evident that his thoughts were racing. He was undoubtedly contemplating how to salvage his business reputation, family life, and most crucially, his income. I sensed that something was about to transpire shortly. Once these gentlemen departed, Jeff and I would require a grave discussion regarding your prospective employment is to be held. I shall consult with my legal counsel to arrive at a solution that meets your needs to some extent. You both understand the potential consequences for our company if this material were to emerge prematurely. Bill mused aloud, do not worry, Mr. Evans will safeguard your privacy until we receive a serious proposal from you. However, I would not yet terminate Mr. Davis's employment. He may possess additional copies of the tape, thereby affording him leverage. In the event that we fail to act, you and Mr. Davis will be able to. It is important to note that both parties could potentially face legal consequences for their involvement with an employee who has a direct impact on their job status and future prospects. Ted had previously informed us that when we were both about to leave, Tad reclaimed the DVD player and photographs that we had brought with us. We left just as Bill and Jeff appeared to be preparing for a private discussion. I approached Ted with a question, but he requested silence until we were outside. I was unaware of my wife's presence in the corner. I attempted to overhear our conversation, but Tad did, and the last thing I heard was Mr. Evans reprimanding Julie via her intercom. I requested the immediate presence of Sue Thomas. I anticipated an intriguing encounter with Thomas. Bill would soon discover that I had found his DVD in our home. Once outside, I inquired as to why he had provided Jeff with an escape route by suggesting he use his own videotape against Bill. Divide and conquer, as they say. Ted explained that it is preferable if they act as individuals rather than as a group, as it allows for more flexibility in decision-making. The proposal was met with enthusiasm. Ted also observed sagaciously that Jeff and Bill have families and attend church, despite the content of the videotapes. They are currently disinclined to disrupt the familial dynamic. As I departed the building, I realized that it would henceforth be remembered as the site of my wife's betrayal, rather than the esteemed workplace she once inhabited. Ted's words brought me back to reality. Let us, therefore, meet for a beer before our next meeting at the tennis club at 4 p.m. Both of us could benefit from a beverage at this time, though I am uncertain as to the precise nature of the discussion I wish to have with you. As we drove across town toward the tennis club, Ted mentioned that we had stopped at a quaint bar restaurant adjacent to the tennis club. He ordered 2 beers and began speaking to me. I believe that Bill Evans will extend an offer, but it will likely be for just under $1 million. I am familiar with that figure. His legal team, which was engaged in another case, demonstrated considerable expertise. He is also a pragmatic individual. I will contact him tomorrow to convey that a lowball offer will not bode well for his client's business or personal life. I will propose a figure of approximately $3 million or suggest that we abandon negotiations altogether. Furthermore, he disclosed that I need to ascertain whether, in the event that the offer is rejected, I have your authorization to cast Susan in the role of a character in the proceedings. It would be remiss of me to refrain from painting a less than flattering portrait of her. It is my duty as your legal representative to pursue what ensures victory in court, even if it entails painting an unflattering portrait of her. It is likely that the situation will become highly publicized and potentially ugly. I will utilize every legal means at my disposal to secure our case. You might not appreciate all the potentially damning revelations about Sue, her marriage, and even Ted interjected at this juncture to suggest that there might be some embarrassing details of Ted's and Sue's intimate life that could emerge. I replied that I was not sure if Ted had considered this possibility. I then informed him that I had given the matter considerable thought and believed that I possessed more integrity than they gave me credit for. I stated that if necessary, I was willing to proceed, but that I would prefer to explore the financial offer route first. I then alluded to this to Ted, who agreed with my assessment. He proposed commencing with an assessment of the terms proposed by Bill. He guaranteed that, should Bill's offer be deemed unsatisfactory, he would attend to all the requisite paperwork in a prompt manner. Furthermore, he indicated that he would leverage his contacts in the newspaper industry and friends at 3 local news stations. He asserted that they would be willing to obtain footage or images, even if it entailed the use of blue bars to censor the explicit content. In the context of the sitcom Ted, the protagonist consistently demonstrates reliability and sound judgment. However, the current situation is regrettably unproductive and has the potential to result in significant personal and professional consequences. It is evident that the husband's initial lack of awareness led to a series of unfortunate events. Nevertheless, the wife's actions have not been entirely without fault, and it is therefore crucial to take appropriate measures to rectify the situation. Bobby, I am aware of your frustration. I understand your position. Let us now turn our attention to the material for our next meeting. The individual in question is Mr. Harry RLE, the proprietor of the Ace Tennis Club. This is the same individual I previously identified in the video footage from my office. He has indicated that he will likely adopt a hands-off approach, asserting that adults will be adults and that he will not intervene. Even Tony's tennis coach might be dismissed for appearance's sake. It would be prudent to anticipate that Tony may be rehired at a later date. He is held in high regard at the club, particularly among female members. It is important to note that while men are the primary contributors to the club's finances, women are also stakeholders. This dynamic will be pivotal in your interaction with Mr. Riddle. I was given a briefing on the situation, and we arrived just in time to observe that Mr. Riddle and Thad did not see eye to eye. Their animosity was palpable. From the outset, Mr. Riddle made it clear that the meeting was coming to a close. He then introduced Mr. Riddle to me, indicating that he wanted me to know that Tony Simba, my tennis instructor, was having an affair with Mr. Thomas's wife. Mr. Riddle then informed me that he wanted to know what I intended to do about this situation. He asserted that he would assume responsibility for the matter and, in a concise manner, convey the consequences to Thad. Harry Rell stated that the private affairs of consenting adults, conducted within the confines of their own time, are beyond the scope of his concern. Additionally, he directed a remark to Mr. Thomas, emphasizing that if he is unable to satisfy his wife in the bedroom, he should not seek external solutions and blame others for her potential infidelity. There are numerous individuals who are discontented and frequent the Ace Tennis Club, some of whom engage in unprofessional conduct. Harry then proceeded to elucidate the rationale behind their return to the club, emphasizing the personalized attention that my staff provides to them. I was compelled to respond, but Ted restrained my wrist and advised me to remain composed and follow his lead. Harry's assumption that this incident occurred outside the club without the owner's knowledge and consent was, I felt, somewhat presumptuous. Ted confronted him on this point. Ted proceeded to play the video footage on his own DVD player, directing the screen towards Harry. Harry's immediate reaction indicated his displeasure with the content of the video. Harry then interjected, stating that he had taken advantage of a paying member of the club, Mrs. Susan Thomas, a married woman whose dues were paid by her husband, Thomas. The individual in question, who was previously a satisfied customer, has since become disgruntled and informed Mr. RLE, who has remained silent. As soon as this information becomes public knowledge, every dues-paying member will want to know if his wife is engaging in similar activities while he is fulfilling the role of the primary source of income. I will have to subpoena everyone who was present in the locker room on that day. Married men may not be pleased with you about this, Ted added, adopting an almost storytelling tone. Furthermore, there is the issue of reasonable expectation of privacy when filming in the locker room. Harry asserted that, once he has finished speaking, the club will lose its reputation in the community and may also suffer financially. Ted then made an additional statement to further persuade Harry. He said that the club would like to make a substantial offer to Harry and that prompt action would be appreciated. Doing so could spare Harry considerable inconvenience and financial loss. Ted concluded as we observed Harry sell when his options. Ted, you're still a genuine piece of work, but I cannot dispute your reasoning. I will contact you tomorrow with my offer. If I comply, all tapes will be returned to me and remain confidential. I will also willingly terminate Tony's employment now, if that is all you, a legal extortionist, came for. Get out of here, Harry Riddle dismissed us as Ted. He then retrieved the DVD player with a grin and powered it off, saying hello to Tito Martinez. Before exiting the room, Ted remarked to Harry, "Go to hell." This was all Harry could retort. Ted then chuckled all the way back to the parking lot. This was quite the adventure. Now we wait for suggestions. Ted informed me as we headed to his house for a delightful homemade dinner. By the end of the week, Bill Evans had offered nearly. Jeff Davis was offered $7 million to retain his position as an employee of Bill Evans. Evans had previously obtained all of Davis's tapes, which resulted in Davis losing his job. Evans terminated Davis's employment, leaving Davis with few options. I pursued the two individuals who were with my wife on the night I discovered her affair with Jeff. They were two of Jeff's major clients. Neither of them desired publicity, whether for their companies or themselves. Each offered me $1 million to remain silent. Harry Rell declined to make an offer and suggested legal action. Consequently, we initiated legal proceedings. Ultimately, he lost $3 million as a result of our actions. His club experienced a significant decline in membership, leading him to relinquish ownership. He may have believed he could evade consequences, but the judge was not persuaded by the evidence presented, including footage from the private locker rooms and evidence of infidelity. She was awarded a house and a car as she desired without having to pay any child support. I only encountered her twice in court. Both times, I greeted her as a promiscuous woman, which caused her to become emotional. I often reflected on why she was crying now, but not before causing such distress in my life. I received more money than I ever imagined thanks to in accordance with Ted's counsel, the anguish persisting to the present day. The tribulations of that calamitous year materialized instantaneously. I was unaware that anyone had addressed me until I emerged from my reverie and heard the restaurant manager inquiring if I was well. I was uncertain as to how long I had been standing. I was overcome with a sudden recollection and shook my head to clear it, returning to the present moment. I apologized and, once I saw the group I had come to meet, I explained to the manager. I noticed the envious gaze he gave, reminiscent of how people regard an elderly person lost in reverie. I then proceeded to make my way towards my ex-wife. My wife's demeanor indicated surprise upon our reunion. I had gained weight, grown my hair out, and developed a beard. I was nursing an old knee injury from baseball, which I had previously cited as the cause. However, in truth, I had settled into a comfortable routine with her. I had a shorter haircut, was in good physical condition due to regular exercise, and had undergone successful knee surgery, for which I was grateful to Jeff and Bill for providing financial assistance. My suits were now I had made an effort to present well in public, opting to speak up first. I made a point of complimenting her appearance, noting that she looked fantastic. I was aware that her name was Susan Bobby, but I deliberately chose to address her as Strumpet, knowing that it would elicit a reaction. I was skilled at pushing her buttons. She responded by asking me why I did not address her by her given name. I replied that I had not labeled her as such, it was her own choice to be called that. I simply found it fitting. I warned her that I would not tolerate her behavior. I informed her 3 years ago that she had shattered my heart, and I will always remember her by that title. As the men beside her began to object and rise from his seat, I explained that he should remain calm. Tears welled up, smudging her makeup. Her boyfriend interjected, "Go freshen up, Sue, and fix your face." She replied, "I'll handle this idiot for you," with those words. She stood, locking eyes with me, as I reciprocated with a single her gaze, perhaps, revealed the anguish I had harbored for 3 years. Her tears flowed harder, surprising me that she still held any sentiment toward me. It was likely a combination of lingering guilt and the pain of my departure. She declared, tearfully, that I should be gone when she returned. She then proceeded to the restroom, where I observed the sizable engagement ring on her finger as she wiped her eyes and left. I was informed that her name was Sue and that her ex-husband was Bob Thomas. "Husband?" he inquired with disdain in his tone. "Indeed, and you must be the Newman she's been dreaming of," I retorted, sensing his indignation. "I am Sue, the chief financial officer. If I were you, I would refrain from using that term," he cautioned, though his reluctance to cause a scene was evident. "I only sought to converse with you privately. I have 3 inquiries, and then I will cease all contact with you," I informed him, noting his quizzical expression. "I have previously found myself in your situation, and I am reluctant to see anyone else endure a similar fate. I suppose the trumpet painted me as a lousy husband, abusive, neglectful, or a womanizer," I remarked, knowing precisely what she would. I conveyed to him that I am not here to salvage my reputation in your eyes. In all honesty, I doubt it would serve any purpose. Firstly, I inquired as to whether Sarah still hosts her Avon gatherings at her place on Tuesdays and Thursdays. "I am here to assist Sarah with her decor sales on Mondays and Wednesdays. It seems that your memory is somewhat faulty," he responded promptly. "Does she still take tennis lessons on Saturdays?" I inquired. "Sue swings a racket on Sundays." "You seem to have a hazy recollection for someone married to her for so long," he commented triumphantly. "Final question, have you ever checked under the bottom drawer of the dresser in the living room?" I inquired hastily. "Why would I even do that?" He protested, "The 3 questions I posed to you are the reasons why we're no longer together." I continued, "I still have all the leftover divorce paperwork in my office. This includes legal documents, emails from Sarah and the other woman, and hours of videotapes. I have been in contact with her for the past 3 years, so I thought you should have them." I retrieved a worn and folded piece of paper from my wallet. "This is what the other woman wrote to Sarah when she inquired about how to get rid of me. Before I discovered her infidelity, I had no idea who she was. It is likely that he still does not fully comprehend the situation. However, the entirety of the matter revolves around him." I proceeded to hand him the paper. Nevertheless, I was acquainted with Sue and was therefore aware of her proclivity for meticulous routines. On occasion, her habits could be infuriating. Additionally, I had the distinct impression that even with a new partner, she would adhere to her previous patterns. I proceeded to elaborate. "You appeared reluctant to accept the paper, but your curiosity ultimately prevailed." He reached over and opened the email. "I have carried it for 3 years, occasionally rereading it and striving to better myself so that no woman would ever write such things about me again. Of all the evidence, the email had the greatest impact on me, which is the rationale behind my continued possession of the aforementioned document is rooted in its intrinsic value. It is, in fact, the same email I referenced earlier in my narrative." Peter perused the missive at a measured pace and then placed it on the table with haste. He procured a pen and inscribed a note, which he then promptly departed from the restaurant, offering no final gesture of acknowledgement or gratitude. His demeanor remained stoic and unchanging. I approached him to inquire about the contents of the note. I requested to see the email in question. I informed him that I would return home shortly and asked him to wait there. I then informed him that I would call him in 15 minutes, explaining that I needed to check something in my living room. I then excused myself, stating that I would be right back. From his demeanor, I sensed that Peter had seen the truth, even if he was not pleased about it. I sensed that I had hit too close to home on all three matters. The email appeared to represent a critical juncture, prompting Peter to seek verification. He left a note on Sue's table, and I took my leave. I was disinclined to remain in the restaurant with anyone that evening. I contacted my client, who was amenable to rescheduling the meeting due to unexpected delays. As I was departing, I took one last look at the table. Sue returned, searching for Peter. She noticed her old email and Peter's note. Her face drained of color as she recognized the contents of her old email and Peter's message. The last time I saw my wife, she was sobbing so intensely that the entire restaurant, upon turning to look, I experienced a sudden pang of pity, yet simultaneously, I felt an overwhelming sense of indifference. This marked the final encounter between us. I still find myself wondering if Peter managed to locate something under the dresser drawer, as Sue's tears seemed to indicate he might have done so. Here follows the subsequent narrative. She approached me unexpectedly, outright declining to engage in any further games until I discovered her. I was at a loss for words, bewildered by the situation. I attempted to salvage things, but it was evident that I was not the person to do so. I was not being unreasonable to request that the payments for the children's college education continue, but beyond that, I had no further demands. I sat there, waiting for a response. Holding the divorce petition in her hand, Julia was unable to read it. She had already removed her belongings without my knowledge. Despite her efforts to appear collected, Julia continued to chat. Her nervous habit and fast speech demonstrated her worry. I looked over the documents with a smile on my face. I rose from my seat, and it appeared that she became aware of my presence and began speaking more rapidly. I nonchalantly tossed the envelope onto the coffee table, indicating that I wished to be left alone. At the very least, she ceased her verbalizations, and she stumbled over her words as I proceeded to the kitchen for a cold beverage. Rather than concluding her remarks, I opted to seek solace in a cool beer. The wife proceeded to exit the residence via the front entrance for the final time. Approximately 10 minutes later, upon opening my second bottle of beverage, my attention was drawn to the item she had previously left behind. It was neatly arranged, in a manner consistent with her previous description. Additionally, she provided a power of attorney, which granted me the authority to sell the residence. We had recently secured a second mortgage to cover the tuition of our two sons, Kevin and Mark, at various academic institutions. The sale of the house would not even generate sufficient funds to cover the real estate commission. The couple had abruptly terminated their 2-year-long relationship. Julia and Gabriel Bryant had been together for a decade. He was her first love and an old flame. She frequently mentioned him, and I overheard whispers from common friends about him over the years. I initially dismissed these whispers, assuming he was only an ex-boyfriend. I had assumed he was my boyfriend. Now I see that the situation was more complicated than I had thought. As I became aware of the increasing darkness in the room, I knocked over 3 empty bottles. I went for the end table lamp. The doorbell rang at that very moment. I was annoyed. What now? I mumbled to myself. Anthony, I just heard something. Danny felt. I should check on you, Julia's sister Karen remarked. I always preferred Karen over Julia, to be honest. When I was drunk, I liked her company more than Julia's. My thoughts drifted into a perilous region. Danny, my best buddy, should not even have his wife on my mind. I shook my head, hoping to dispel the alcohol fog and regain some sense of reason. She led me softly to the kitchen, and I offered only minimal resistance. I did not appreciate being treated as though I were an invalid. I was fully capable of managing on my own. The strong fluorescent lighting irritated my eyes, but I managed to squint through the discomfort. I was unsure of how many beers I had already consumed, but I managed to finish. Approximately half of the coffee was consumed before Anthony became aware that Karen had not spoken. Anthony, are you feeling any better? Can we talk right now? She eventually asked. Give me a minute. I have to use the restroom. The law only became aware of this situation this afternoon. It is important not to be too hard on yourself, Anthony. I had always assumed that she had feelings for that individual, even after you got married. Karen admitted that it would have been beneficial if you had said something 20 years ago. I let out a grunt. Anthony, you were not at fault. I hope she will let go of him with time. You two seem very happy together. Karen elaborated. Karen, it was not as ideal as it appeared when viewed in retrospect. When we look back, our relationship was predominantly platonic, with minimal romantic interest. Despite my efforts over the years, I was unable to elicit any significant interest from her. I attempted various forms of romantic gesture, including flowers, candies, and jewelry, but none of these had any impact. We had a generally harmonious relationship, with minimal conflict. I believe I understand the reason for this now. I acknowledged her adeptness in concealing it. I commented, "Thank you. Can I have a few of those oatmeal cookies in the container behind you? My stomach has been protesting." Karen replied, "Just say it." I inquired about the circumstances that led to my wife's decision to leave me. Following Gabriel's withdrawal from high school and subsequent enlistment in the Air Force, Julia began dating Julia's first love, Gabriel. Karen explained that I gave a nod and shrugged. It is a common phenomenon that women never forget their first love. Julia was particularly unhappy when he left. She expressed a desire to start a family and have children. He regarded you as the optimal candidate for the role. I believe she made an astute decision. I was unaware that she was merely using you until Venture returned. Karen stated that she did not believe she was aware of his return. Why is he back again? I inquired. He served in the Air Force for 20 years, retired as a major with a substantial pension, and has numerous executive positions lined up for his second career. Julia was informing me of this. Karen informed me that she was proud to be a part of his military accomplishment. In response to my inquiry about the nature of their living arrangement, she admitted that Anthony had moved in with him. I then asked how long he had been there. She replied that he had been there for approximately 3 weeks. I have been a fool for a long time, as I informed her as soon as he got back into town. I murmured, "It appears that way." Karen apologized, her tone empathetic, trying to refill my coffee cup, which I refused. "I do not need any more coffee. All I want now is a shower and a good night's sleep." "Thank you for stopping by," Karen said. "When you go, make sure everything is locked up." I managed a feeble smile. In conclusion, as I departed, I observed that my own anguish was reflected in my children's expressions. I was relieved that they were no longer residing with me. Explaining the circumstances would have been challenging, as they would eventually discover the truth. However, I hope that I had regained my composure by then, as I did not want to appear overly distressed. My career path was not particularly ambitious, but I found I derived satisfaction from my work. Despite the company's ongoing efforts to advance me to a managerial position over the last decade, I declined because of the long hours and significant duties. However, these issues were unimportant now. I contacted my district supervisor to express my desire to advance in my career that afternoon. I was assigned to manage a new business only 10 miles from my residence. Following 3 days of training in Baltimore, I began my new role. I informed the boys about the issue with their mother, advertised the house for sale, and rearranged all of my credit card and banking accounts. Julia's automobile was registered in her name, but I promptly removed it to comply with my insurance policy. Launching a new store required a significant amount of my work, which I embraced as a distraction from my personal stress. The majority of issues where the issue was simply addressed due to the company's reduced methods. Corporate sent experienced store openers to help ease the transition in the first 2 weeks. Half of the personnel were experienced employees who had been transferred from other local stores due to their support and my trust in the position. Before long, I felt at ease navigating the shop's demands. Everything was under control and functioning nicely at the business. I found the time to start organizing my personal matters because I planned to get a small apartment near the store. I began the process of getting rid of superfluous objects from the house. I donated a considerable number of items to local agencies, which were eager to receive them. I was particularly reluctant to part with the marriage bed, but ultimately did so. The disposal of wedding and family photographs provided a sense of satisfaction, despite my limited collection of images of the boys. He subsequently telephoned to request my attendance at a barbecue at his residence the following Sunday. He informed me that Julia would not be present and that he would provide updates on Gabriel Bryant, a local military hero. The barbecue proved to be a relatively subdued event, with Donnie and Karen's 2 teenage children making a brief appearance before withdrawing. Donnie and I conversed. Karen spent the majority of the afternoon ensuring a consistent supply of cold beer and cleaning up after Donnie's culinary endeavors. Donnie, could you provide an update on Major Bryant? I've only heard his statements at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall. Foreign Wars Hall. Gabrielle and Julia have been stopping by a few times a week. He is characterized by a penchant for bravado and handshakes. The other men at the establishment appear impressed by him, but I believe it is simply because he is new to the scene. Donnie responded that the majority of the regulars there are in their 60s. He also mentioned that my wife is not present while he is boasting. I inquired about this. Julia typically stands at his side, displaying pride. Donnie responded, she never acted that way while we were together. I emitted a grunt, indicating that I did not believe Donnie's assertion. It is important not to take things personally. Anthony, you are not a decorated war hero. Donnie emitted a giggle, although I did not find it amusing. Anthony, he wears a baseball cap with the Major's emblem is clearly visible, and his vehicle is also emblazoned with the gold oak leaf badge. He is striving to impress others with his rank. Donnie explained that something seemed peculiar about Major Bryant, and this occurred just as Karen arrived with fresh beers. I finished mine, and Donnie, Gabrielle never completed high school. What steps did he take to become an officer? I recall that the Mustang program was cancelled years ago. The commissioning process now requires a degree. How did that person receive a college degree when he couldn't even complete high school? I asked a valid question. Donnie stated that he didn't have an answer. I inquired as to whether he had truly joined the VFW. He confirmed that he had indeed signed up. I then requested a copy of his membership application. He did not have an issue with this. I explained that I simply wished to look into a couple of things. Karen then intervened, asking us to lighten the mood. I am unable to recall the specifics of our conversation. However, as I drove home a few hours later, I noticed a peculiar grin spreading across my face. The following week commenced in a relatively smooth manner. The divorce proceedings continued, with 3 interested parties expressing interest in the property. The realtor also conveyed optimism regarding the situation. Everything appeared to be progressing well until Thursday. Upon discovering Lucy Sanchez awaiting me in my office, I was informed that she had been promoted and reassigned from another establishment in the same city to the recently opened location. I was aware that she was a dedicated employee, and her appointment was met with unanimous approval. I was not enthusiastic about the prospect of replacing Lucy. Recruiting personnel for the graveyard shift was challenging, and identifying qualified candidates was even more difficult. I hope you are not here to file a formal complaint, Mrs. Sanchez. I greeted her, noting her visible anxiety despite her outwardly cheerful demeanor. I could use some assistance, she said. Of course, I replied. I'll do whatever I can. I made an offer, $215 per week. I have 2 sons, both of whom are 16 years old and employed part-time after school. Despite their best efforts, they are unable to catch the 7 a.m. school bus. On occasion, I arrive home after 8 p.m. She explained that her children were still asleep, noting that it was not laziness, but rather fatigue, that kept them from rising early. She requested assistance in motivating them to start their day. I clarified that she was not seeking a raise so that her children could quit their jobs. Instead, she explained, her children were working to save for college. They excelled in academics, but she was concerned about ensuring they made it to school. I inquired about her expectations. She replied, help. I found it intriguing that she was not complaining. This was an opportunity to observe her non-complaining behavior. Such an absurd notion. The mother, who previously maintained a strict and organized household, is now struggling to manage her own children. I let out a brief, amused sound, which prompted a harsh response from Mr. Clark. It's not amusing if you can't offer some assistance, he said. I will have to start looking for another job, Mrs. Sanchez replied firmly. That's ironic, I added. Mrs. Sanchez, you manage a group of people who, given the opportunity, could make mistakes. However, they don't because they respect you and your ideals. These 2 young men, on the other hand, appear to be taking advantage of the situation. Where's their father? Amid all of this, I questioned Mrs. Sanchez's behavior. As she began to rise from her seat, her eyes flashed with wrath for a brief moment. I felt I had pushed her too far. "Mr. Clark, you are an arrogant jerk. To be fair, everyone applauded your intelligence, but it appears they made a mistake." "I did not come here to be insulted," she stated emphatically. "Please calm down and take a seat. I believe I may have a solution." I interrupted, attempting to relieve the tension. She reluctantly returned to her chair, her expression remaining bitter. "I propose changing your work hours," I continued. "You will begin around 11 o'clock. This schedule allows sufficient time for the preparation of merchandise prior to the arrival of the night crew at 12 o'clock. The labor period extends until 6 p.m. Upon the arrival of the first of the day shift managers, the remainder of your shift will be covered, allowing you to return home in time to send your sons off to school and potentially even serve them breakfast. This solution has the potential to be highly beneficial, with the exception of one significant drawback. In order to maintain my health insurance, I am required to work a minimum of 38 planned hours. I am unwilling to lose this benefit." "You go to church, Lucy?" I inquired. "Damn it, there you go again. You have a knack for getting people to react. What are my church attendance roles related to my job?" She became visibly agitated. "Lucy, you have such a fiery personality. I'd appreciate it if you could remain calm while I finish." I requested and ceased all communication with Mrs. Sanchez. "I'm not married," I stated. "I'm sure you have a witty response to that." She responded in a straightforward manner, her demeanor evincing a certain degree of displeasure. I exhaled and reclined in my chair, only to find myself briefly falling backwards. I gazed upwards, taking in the familiar sight of the inexpensive lighting fixtures. I could hear her muffled laughter as she gazed across the desk at me, her hand darting to conceal her smile. "I apologize," she managed to say between laughter. She responded with laughter, indicating that my clumsiness had caused her amusement. As I readjusted in my seat, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "If I may not address you as Mrs. Sanchez," I inquired, "what should I call you?" She replied curtly, "Lucy." I then asked, "Should I call you Lucy, or is there another name you prefer?" "From 10 a.m. to noon, that will cover the additional hours you require. However, that is not the primary argument. I made it clear that it is of great importance to me that you pay the additional fee for the family health insurance plan. Is that correct?" I proceeded, "Yes, it costs $180 per month and covers both of my sons." She affirmed. I informed her that this would entail a change in your employment status, which would result in your sons being automatically covered by your insurance plan. Additionally, you would receive a slight increase in remuneration. I also mentioned that this would render you ineligible for overtime. Lucy made a deduction, and I concurred. She was silent for a moment, and I was struck by her remarkable beauty. Her hair was dark but not quite black, neatly framing her face and her eyes, which were as deep and dark as coal and possessed an intensity that was difficult to ignore. There was no extra fat on her, giving her a somewhat conical aspect. Before she spoke anything, I was unable to stop pondering her physique. Hiding beneath her work clothing, I accept that, but I have no experience with daytime monitoring. I have never had to communicate with customers, she admits. Don't stress over it. I'll be present for the first 4 shifts to help you. You can't mess it up, I assured her. Thus began my connection with Lucy Sanchez. It was undoubtedly a stressful experience, and at the time, I was unaware that it would evolve into something significant. I had anticipated that Lucy would remain for 6 hours on Sunday morning, but we ultimately worked late into the evening. She was resolute in her determination to comprehend the intricacies of her newly assigned responsibilities, and I found myself enjoying her company while reading the Sunday paper. I came across a brief article about a fundraiser at the local American Legion post, where Major Gabriel Bryant was proudly depicted in his full uniform. My estranged wife was also seen in the photograph, appearing as proud as if she had earned the honors herself, which was a challenging realization to process. I did not speak with Donnie again until Monday evening. Karen had contacted me at work, suggesting that I join them for spaghetti. How could I possibly refuse? Donnie provided me with Gabriel's VFW membership application and discharge papers. I informed him about the photo in the Sunday paper, and he promised to obtain the necessary forms. Additionally, Karen had learned from the American Legion post that Gabrielle had filed for membership in the Liberty Keys Country Club. Julia and I had attempted to join on one occasion, but we were rejected. I regarded this outcome with indifference, but Julia was profoundly disappointed. According to Karen, Gabriel's application appeared to be pre-approved. The week progressed at a slow pace. I had already procured a modest apartment where I would typically retreat after work to unwind with at least 3 drinks, occasionally more. Fortunately, the rent included basic cable, which mitigated the risk of boredom. The following week, my DSL internet connection was scheduled for installation. The week concluded on a positive note when I discovered an invitation to supper with Lucy and her 2 sons on my desk. She insisted on providing her address and phone number again, despite my previous receipt of this information. The request felt unusual and could have been avoided. A violation of company policy. The fraternity's national policy is to err on the side of caution. I emailed my supervisor in Baltimore to explain the circumstances after gaining his approval. I felt better about the whole situation. I grabbed a bottle of wine to bring along, but I wasn't sure what to bring for the guys' meeting. Lucy's sons made me apprehensive, but when they found out I had 2 sons at college, the mood lightened considerably. Despite my attempts to include Lucy in the majority of the discussions, she felt excluded. She gave me a tiny grimace as if she indicated that I was not required to be concerned about it, and it appeared that she was pleased that I had established a rapport with Grant and James. The evening passed with remarkable swiftness, and we did not have the opportunity to open the wine that Sunday. I spent approximately 2 hours with Lucy as she commenced her inaugural formal shift as a supervisor. I could discern that she desired for me to take my leave so that she could navigate her duties independently. In my estimation, this was a favorable indication. She informed me that she would contact me should any issues arise, and she even extended an invitation for me to join her for supper that evening. After dinner, Grant and James departed, leaving Lucy and me alone. We proceeded to engage in work activities. Together, we proceeded to complete the dinner dishes before opening the bottle of wine. The subsequent conversation was somewhat awkward, particularly in light of our limited personal interactions outside of the professional context. Lucy expressed concern about the potential challenges of our professional relationship, but she soon dismissed this notion, expressing confidence that any conflicts could be readily overcome. I, however, did not bring up the topic. Lucy was compelled to disclose her marital status. She revealed that she had been living with the boy's father in Tucson until one day he vanished without a trace. Despite the 3-year wait, he never returned. After a year, he never returned. Her brother, a bricklayer in the Philadelphia region, persuaded her to live with him and his family. Eventually, she obtained her own place and has been working She has remained unmarried since then, in order to provide for her sons. Despite the serious nature of the subject matter, the wine bottle was consumed without interruption. I derived comfort from Lucy's companionship, and we spent several hours together. Consequently, the quantity of wine consumed was not a significant issue. When I returned home for a few days, my routine remained unchanged, both at work and in my personal life. In my personal life, Donnie visited me one evening, having obtained information from an American Legion post. We proceeded to discuss our next steps, now that we had all of the required background information. The consumption of a couple of beers proved to be excessive, resulting in Karen having to come over to sober her intoxicated husband. Consequently, I was late for work the following morning. Given my position as manager and my habitual timeliness, no one protested. However, another unexpected development occurred on Friday morning. 3 of the company's vice presidents appeared and conducted a brief walkthrough of the store, which felt disingenuous. This was evident during our lunch break, according to my observations. There seemed to be a considerable by the conclusion of the dinner, there were few remaining store managers. I was offered the position of regional supervisor, responsible for 6 stores within a 30-mile radius. The remuneration and benefits were significantly above my expectations, and I accepted the role of second-in-command at the current business without hesitation. I was gratified when I transferred control of the entire organization to him. I made one request of him, to leave Lucy alone. He gave me a wink and a smile, indicating that we were on the same page. Lucy was naturally disappointed to see me leave the store, but she was pleased with my advancement. I took her out for a beautiful meal, which could be considered our first formal date. The guys were pleased to give us a night out together. It was also the first occasion on which I had seen her in formal attire. She appeared particularly resplendent. I was gratified to observe that she seemed to accept my promotion with greater alacrity once I had assured her that I would continue to reside and work in the region. However, she was less pleased to learn that I would be required to travel to Baltimore for a period of 2 weeks for training. I enjoyed Sunday brunch with Donnie and Karen on several occasions. I was enjoying my recent good fortune or, perhaps, attempting to avoid the temptation of alcohol. I had planned to go to Maryland that evening to be ready for my first day of training. Donnie was curious about my plans for Gabriel and Julia. I informed him that it would have to wait until I finished my training and settled into my new job. Sometimes, I would have to postpone my plans until the next day. Lucy and I talked on the phone. We conversed via telephone, and it was as though we were teenagers again. She was eager to learn about my training, and I made sure to inquire about what was going on in her life, particularly with the boys. She seemed to appreciate my interest in them. My new employment required unanticipated obligations, including a significant emphasis on community involvement. I was expected to join a variety of civic and social organizations, including the local county club, which delighted me. I was gratified to learn that my position at the company would likely result in my being approved elsewhere. I returned home for the first weekend, during which I met Lucy twice and received my first kiss from her. However, I was troubled by a persistent feeling of unease regarding my current marital status. Lucy teased me about my doubts, and we shared a laugh. Her cheerful personality was infectious, and I found myself enjoying every minute of my new role. I leased a modest office in a local business complex, complete with a secretary. It was evident that this was a common practice, as everything was prepared and operational on the first day. I was eager to assume my new responsibilities and immediately began the process of becoming a full member of the Liberty Keys Country Club. This involved signing the necessary paperwork and obtaining my membership card, which was my initial priority upon arrival. The club foyer, resplendent in a new suit and driving my slick new business car, I felt like I was on top of the world. That is, until I noticed Julia. She was standing amid a group of women, dressed in lovely tennis outfits. I was immediately struck by the realization that she played tennis. The anguish and shame of her betrayal returned, breaking my faith. My swagger faded as I tried to get by the gathering. However, my attempt to go unnoticed was foiled when one of the women commented, "Isn't that your husband walking in," refusing to turn back. I maintained my composure as I handed over my application to the attendant. He disappeared into a back room, leaving me to anticipate the impending confrontation. I prepared myself for the uncomfortable exchange, but my thoughts went blank, leaving me without a suitable response to the circumstances. "Anthony, what exactly are you doing here? This area is reserved for members." Julia's tone was filled with astonishment and discomfort. "Hello, Julia," I said, attempting to remain composed. "You look fine," she replied. "Very nice attire. Is this something new?" "I didn't know you played tennis," I said, attempting to strike up a casual conversation. However, my attempt at casual conversation seemed forced, and I couldn't help but stumble over my words. My awkward chattering revealed my nerves, and I felt a sting of embarrassment. Julia said that I am currently engaged in tennis instruction. I had long desired to play tennis, but financial constraints precluded this. Her response evoked only a smile in return. "You should not be here, Anthony. This situation causes me considerable unease. You are aware that this facility is accessible only to members." Julia persisted, and her distress was evident as the attendant returned with my membership materials. I graciously accepted them, nodding in silent gratitude. Julia stood there perplexed as I turned to leave. I smiled. I remained silent as I made my way back through the club lobby, resisting the urge to look back as I left. On my way back to the office, I treated Lucy to a meal at Red Lobster. Despite my initial intention to refrain from boasting, I felt a sense of satisfaction after recounting my earlier encounter with Julia. We engaged in some light-hearted banter about the lack of alcohol at our meal, given that Lucy had to leave for work at 11. "The time is 12 a.m. Lucy proposed that we meet at the club for a late lunch on Sunday, once her shift had concluded. I was hopeful that I would be able to see Gabrielle and Julia until Friday. The week had proceeded in an orderly fashion. Molly, my recently appointed secretary, greeted me with a smile as I entered the office. The local newspaper on my desk included a photograph of Gabriel Bryant in handcuffs being brought into a simple black sedan. Gabriel had discovered that the American Legion subjected their applications to meticulous examination in order to prevent undeserving individuals from gaining access. Veterans from sneaking through, although he had retired from the Air Force as a technical sergeant rather than a major. The fact that he wore unearned honors would undoubtedly exacerbate his problems. They called it stolen valor, which is a grave offense that should not be taken lightly. I had the distinct impression that Gabriel Bryant was about to suffer a significant loss of reputation in his community. Molly handed me a cup of coffee and told me it was good to grin. Her comment did inspire a fantastic response from me. About 1 hour later, I received a call from the realtor informing me that the house had sold and that the closing date was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In my opinion, things could not be better. My final divorce papers have arrived in the mail. Gabriel appeared to have used his contacts to speed the process. It was evident that we were no longer on good terms. The week's days were concluding on a high note. Donnie came by to check out my new workspace, but his true intention was to inform me that Julia had moved in with him and Karen. Despite his reservations about the new house guest were evident, yet he could not contain his joy at the turn of events. Donnie immediately agreed to join me for a celebration at the nearby corner pub, provided that I was buying. I called Lucy before she left for work and informed her of the good news. She seemed as excited as I was. Donnie roused me from bed on Saturday morning, and I was grateful for his higher tolerance for alcohol. We proceeded to Sean's for their breakfast buffet and some much-needed coffee. Donnie kept me updated on the newest events with my ex. The woman's vehicle had been repossessed. Gabriel asserted that he was covering her payments, yet the checks were returned unpaid. She remained unaware of this until the vehicle was seized. Gabriel's deceit seemed to extend beyond this incident. It appeared to be part of a larger scheme that had misled numerous individuals. Karen had permitted Julio to stay in their residence for a week. Julia, her future plans were unclear. The financial situation, which was already constrained following the divorce, had worsened. Lucy was still asleep when we returned home, but Grant and James were eager to proceed to the golf course at Liberty Keys. Lucy expressed displeasure at our decision to exclude her from the activity. We chose to order pizza and pay for it. Despite the prevailing chaos, we chose to view a movie that evening. Our little bubble offered a respite from the tumult. Lucy and I ventured to the country club for a relaxing brunch on Sunday morning. I had secretly hoped to spot Julia and Gabriel, but they were nowhere to be found. However, we did receive a few curious glances from other patrons. It was an enjoyable excursion. The beginning of numerous additional delightful brunches together before the week's conclusion. Following her departure from Danny and Kieran's residence, Julia located a modest furnished apartment in which to reside. Their relationship had become less intimate than it had been previously. 3 months later, despite their shared status as sisters, Kevin and Marcus returned to their family home. For our wedding, they teased me about having to find 2 replacements. Fortunately, all 4 boys got along, much to Lucy and my delight. Surprisingly, Kevin and Marcus did not bring up Julia during their visit. This was not a conscious decision to avoid the topic, it simply never came up. Whether they stopped by to see her before returning is unknown. The educational institution attended by Donnie was unknown. He acted as my best man, his role was more akin to that of a witness in our civil ceremony. Lucy opted to cease her employment prior to the wedding, and I encouraged Grant and James to terminate their jobs in order to focus on their studies. Fortunately, they did not object to this decision, despite the fact that the sale of the old house yielded minimal profit. A new residence was procured with relative ease. Lucy and I were engaged in the act of Christmas shopping at Target, a mere 2 months after our nuptials, when we encountered Julia fortuitously. She was situated at the customer service counter, attired in the standard Target attire of khaki pants and a red shirt. It appeared that she had lost weight. Our eyes met briefly before she retreated into the encounter at the office behind the counter was not intended to cause her distress, given her history. We subsequently left the store and proceeded to complete our shopping elsewhere. With regard to Gabriel Bryant, he simply disappeared following his arrest and subsequent charges. There were no further updates on his whereabouts during the subsequent period. The Christmas holiday at our new residence was marked by the unexpected appearance of Julia. Lucy had extended the invitation without initially informing me. I experienced a sense of disquiet, but I subsequently recognized Lucy's actions as both polite and courageous. Confronting Julia was essential for achieving closure, although I never forgave her. I was grateful for the opportunity to offer some solace by sharing her account of her actions, despite the recognition of the repercussions. Thank you for your attention to today's narrative. If you found this article engaging, we kindly request that you express your appreciation by liking and subscribing. If you have a story to contribute regarding your own experience or that of someone else, we encourage you to contact us. We appreciate your consideration.